Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 61st episode of IWFM's webinar series, Navigating Turbulent Times. As you joined us today, today's webinar is about In Pursuit of the Holy Grail, determining the return on workplace investment, or as we like to call it, Rowey. I just want to remind our audience that today's webinar is being recorded. We do have a Q&A session with our panelists, and we've got a very intriguing webinar today. So if we move on, I'll just give you a bit of flavour what you would be finding out. We'll be doing welcoming introduction shortly from myself as well, Peter Brogan, Head of Research at IWFM, as well as the panelists and the team behind today's webinar and tool that we're presenting. Background and context that I will do shortly, the tool development, how we actually got here. So we're going to see from two of the panelists in particular how we got there, a demonstration from the tool itself today that we'll be going through, which is exciting to see. As promised, discussion and questions that we really want your feedback on this webinar, and then some final thoughts and close from myself. So if I just move on to the next slide, a little bit of background and context of where we got to on this and why potentially you've joined us today to find out more about the tool. There's no doubt over the years, facilities and corporate real estate industries have become increasingly focused on cost reduction. And for over the years of myself at the Institute and many FM and workplace conferences, the cost versus value debate lingers on, where property is counted as a cost burden rather than an investment that enables and optimizes performance as a value creator. So despite overwhelming evidence over the years about the importance of workplace, its importance and well-being, productivity, there still is an issue. So where as an institute, we challenged the issue, and yes, 5 years ago and 3 years almost to the day, we rebranded from BIFM to IWFM. We bridged the project with the research team here at IWFM, Liverpool at John Moores Business School in particular, which two of the panelists you will hear from shortly, and Workplace Unlimited set out to challenge this. So we collaborated on developing a tool to calculate the return on workplace investment, which is the Rowey tool, which you will be finding out more today. So what's its intentions? Well, really, it's to calculate the impact of workplace projects, including planning, design, or operation, or employee performance. So the Rowey tool is intended to be part of a high-level cost-benefit analysis for new fit or refurbishment, which could be a question that comes up later, projects to factor in the additional value so they no longer depend on cost alone. So this webinar really is today demonstrating the first point of that. And for our members, non-members, which you can gain access to, we have produced the report, the first report about the background and context to the Rowey tool, and that's now available on our website. So as promised, I wanted to get to the team behind this. I alluded to them already, Workplace Unlimited and the Liverpool Business School at Liverpool John Moores. And our pictures are now on screen. So I introduced myself very quickly, but the brains of the operation will be speaking later. So host of Peter Brogan today, Head of Research and Insight at WFM. Obviously, we were part of the research team that triggered the activity of this, working alongside Dr. Nigel Osland, Dr. Matthew Tucker and Dr. Hannah Wilson. As you see there, we've got a lot of doctors on today's webinar. But I'd just like to firstly get you to know the panel a little bit more. So it's going to be a short introduction from each of the panelists and just a little bit of background about yourself. So I'm just going to go as you see on our screens there. So if we start off with a gentleman I've known for many years now, it's where time flies, is Dr. Nigel Osland, Workplace Strategist for Workplace Unlimited. So Nigel, if you just can give a short introduction to the audience, that'd be great.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, so I'm Nigel, and I'm an environmental psychologist and a workplace strategist, and I've been looking at the relationship between buildings and people for at least 30 years. It started in my days at the Building Research Establishment when I was a researcher there, and I've been pursuing that challenge ever since.
No, thank you, Nigel. And as we move along, Dr. Matthew Tucker, Reading Workplace and FM at Liverpool Business School. Good afternoon, Matt.
Hi, Peter. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Matthew Tucker. I've done a lot of work over the years with IWFM and BIFM as it was. ranging from starting up a master's program, which was with IWFM or BIFM as it was, being an awarding body to that master's program. But as you can see there, my title is Reader in Workplace and Facilities Management. That doesn't read I sit and read books all day long, but essentially I do research. It's a traditional academic term for what other countries might call an associate professor, but essentially I do research within workplace and facilities management, and I have done that for a number of years. And this is a project that certainly the three of us have been extremely passionate about over the last couple of years, really, and it's something that Nigel and I, seems like forever ago now, sat down and kind of pondered over, and it's so fantastic today to be able to launch this and introduce you to it all. And I hope you get as excited with it as we are.
Thank you, Matt, for that wonderful stuff. And again, last but not least, Dr. Hannah Wilson, Senior Lecturer in Research Methods at Liverpool Business School. Good afternoon, Hannah.
Hi, thanks, Peter, and hi, everyone. Yeah, as Peter said, I'm a Senior Lecturer in Research Methods in Business in Liverpool Business School at LJMU. So my background is in organisational psychology. But I did my PhD in the built environment, looking at students' perceptions of quality in higher education learning environments. So for a long time now, I've been really interested in that intersection between people and the built environment as well. My research is really in workplace and around collaborative spaces and the adaptations that we can make to individuals' work and learning experiences in workplaces.
No, thank you. And there you go, audience. You've now met the team behind the Rowey tool. I'm going to call it Rowey or Rowey. It sounds like a Bowie or Bowie debate, but I'm going to go with Rowey. So really, we're going to go into the webinar now, really to introduce Rowey in terms of its context and what the tool's about, explain its development, which Matt and Hannah will go in particular. And we've got a demonstration via Nigel of how the tool could be used in practice. So all exciting stuff. As promised, we do have a Q&A session, so please send your questions throughout. The panel will be taking questions and be intrigued to get some of the comments from the audience that have kindly joined us today. So if we move on to the next slide, I think this is where certainly I bring you in to Matt to start to introduce and explain the development of the Rowey tool. So over to yourself, Matt.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So I'm going to do essentially the boring bit of this presentation, where I'm going to just give you a little bit of context to why perhaps IWFM collaborated with a sort of multidisciplinary team in Nigel as an independent consultant, and Hannah and myself as academics working in a university setting. Because what we feel really proud of, and we're really proud that IWFM backed this tool is based on academic rigor. And it is based on quite a substantial literature base, which forms the backbone of the tool. So the tool essentially runs from this large, expansive literature base that we uncovered. So I just want to allude to that a little bit for a few minutes, and then I'll be passing on to Hannah, who's going to give you the kind of back of house component of the tool, where there's essentially an algorithm which will drive it, and then Nigel will be able to give you the much more glamorous part, where he will give you a demonstration of what the front of house part of the tool looks like. Okay, but we wanted to just kick off with this slide to just, I suppose the point we're trying to make is productivity is a word that we band around all the time. I think those that have been in facilities management long enough will know that historically it's definitely a cost-driven industry. There is a large, I don't want to say obsession, but there is a large driver to constantly reduce our costs down. And as a result, the way in which we sometimes perceive productivity can be a little bit limited and a little bit crude and a little bit narrowly focused. Productivity, essentially the ratio of inputs, outputs to an input. For example, you can see different performance outputs there. Performance might be a typical output, like turnover or revenue, against a very, very common input, which would be cost or time. But what we see is probably the missing link to this productivity puzzle is the workplace. And essentially what we've tried to do with this tool, and one of the reasons it says the Holy Grail in the title of the report, is we're trying to make the intangible tangible. So if you think about all of the different characteristics and features of a workplace environment, how we actually justify the return of changing things to do with the workplace, it's very intangible. It's often very, very difficult for us to speak a language that perhaps a finance director wants to speak. So we're trying to crack that part of the productivity puzzle. So we could create a tool which essentially translates to the language of the decision makers within a business. So I'm just going to give you, if we can move on, Nigel, I'm just going to give you a brief background to some of the early stages of the tool development. So if you look at this sequence of events that we've gone through, I'm just going to tackle those first couple, how we basically researched the key themes and the key studies which led to the development of the tool. Then Hannah's going to look at how the tool actually created the database before we pass over to Nigel in terms of the development of the beta version of the tool, which is where we're at now. So basically what this slide is showing you, okay, is the starting point of the tool was essentially an expansive literature search. And without going into detail here, we looked at various databases where we could acquire literature. And we actually started with over 9,000 literature sources. Through a process of targeted searches, we reduced that down to 2,500 individual pieces of literature. And that's the basic message there. Then what we did with those, Hannah and I actually read those 2,500 pieces of literature, and we basically scored them as in terms of their quality. But the key thing to note here is what we were looking for from these papers was, do they have any tangible performance or productivity metrics that we can take forward to inform the algorithm for this tool? So actually, through process of elimination, we took that down to only 42 papers, which we felt were credible. What we did then is we weren't happy just with those 42. We wanted to do a more expansive, what we call a scoping review, to actually combine that through some manual searching, some industry focused reports that we had acquired from other places. And then we ended up with 88 really, really top quality papers which had tangible metrics within them. And then Nigel, one of the reasons for the link up with Nigel is with a colleague, he actually conducted a study back in 2012, something similar, slightly different, but he had acquired 75 sources which were already really, really good and had really good productivity metrics in them. So what we did is we combined our 88 with his 75, and we came up with a final list of 105 individual sources. But the key thing to take away, and this is my tedious link over to Hannah, is what those 105 papers gave us was 194 tangible performance metrics, which we used to inform the back of house part of the Rowey tool. And this is where I'll hand over to Hannah to talk to you about that back of house component.
Thanks, Matt. So as Matt said, I'm going to talk about the back end of the tool. So this is really the behind the scenes bit where we translated the evidence that Matt talked about, all of those 194 metrics, through into the tool. So as you'll see here, what we did first is we grouped the performance metrics, those 194, into 5 themes. So you can see them there: task performance, individual performance, organizational performance, external performance, and human resources. Lots of performance there. So as you can see from the bubbles here, most of the data was around task performance, and this is probably due to the ease of capturing this data. However, there's some really good data appearing in other areas. For example, organizational performance. These might be kind of more wider business metrics. And it might be that these areas are more difficult to capture. So there's definitely potential for future research in these areas. So this data is made up of specific parameters that actually had tangible data, tangible output metrics. So they weren't just hearsay. So this is definitely an area that we see that this is a beta version of the tool. There's definitely potential for future research and development of the tool when more literature is published. So then what we had next is out of the 5 performance metrics, we identified 9 workplace design elements. So we would call these our independent variables and dependent variables. So for anyone who loves research like I do, seeing as my title is Lecturer in Research Methods, but basically what they are is these are the inputs, so the changes that we make to our workplace, so those workplace design elements, and the outputs, which are our performance metrics, which change depending on the changes we make to our workplaces. So this then leads to the performance benefits. So we've focused on specific metrics here that are relevant to the FM industry. So for example, we haven't focused on things like organizational development, technology, culture change. These are specifically workplace design elements. Thank you. So what we did with that data is we wanted to ensure that we were translating the data that we found in a robust and credible way to make sure that the tool remained rigorous and credible. So what we did is as you can see, we gathered a vast array of data that, as Matt said, we hand sifted through a large proportion of it. For example, experimental data, survey self-report data, industry reports. And what we wanted to do was to assess the credibility and the quality of each of the metrics that we had. So we had 3 subscales to do this on. So each of those metrics was evaluated on each of these subscales. So we've got objectivity of metrics, job task relevance, and real world relevance. And we rated each of the individual metrics on how rigorous and how relevant the study was based on these subscales. And this was really important for us to do so that we kept the rigor in our approach. And so we've all seen those claims of huge productivity benefits, but we wanted to really err on the side of caution and with the data. And this is kind of a really unique aspect of the tool, that we weren't just taking each of those metrics at face value, we were really evaluating the credibility and the quality of each of those metrics. So once we'd done this, once we'd weighted all of our metrics, we mapped these back to the 5 performance metrics we identified. So these, as you can see, are here. And what we did is we identified the median, the lower quartile, and the upper quartile from each of these performance metrics. So this is a really important bit for us. And these equated to our confidence in forecasting our performance outcomes. So as you can see here, we have medium, low, and high confidence of each of the metrics, sets of metrics. And you'll see these translated into the tool later on that Nigel will talk you through. And what we suggest is that you default to a low confidence as a starting point for your forecasting on what return you might get. And this is, again, erring on the side of caution of the prediction that we can make about performance benefits. And then from these 5 higher order themes, we identified the 9 workplace design elements I mentioned before. And these are the inputs, those changes that we make. And we had the 160 metrics that I mentioned before for the task performance. And what we could do, because we had such a large amount of data for these, we could break this subscale down into these 9 subscales. So these, again, as I said before, these are those ones that are relevant for the FM industry. So for example, indoor environmental, ventilation, lighting, acoustics, for example. And this is where we can identify the change in which we intend to make to the environment, which contributes to an increase in task performance. So these are all specifically around task performance. And again, you'll see these translated into the tool that Nigel will talk to you about in a minute. So that's all from me about the back end of the tool. I'll now pass over to Nigel with the really interesting bit of this. Who'll show you the front end of the tool.
Thanks, Anna and Matt. I think you've probably been a little bit modest also about the amount of effort and the amount of time that went into unearthing all of those different research papers and sifting them and making sure that we only included the ones that were relevant and practical and so on. So as Anna just said, all that information was fed into this tool. The tool is fundamentally a spreadsheet, an Excel-based tool, and there's various sections to it. I know you can't read this slide particularly well, but I am going to go through each section one stage at a time. But basically, it looks like a spreadsheet. And there's 4 key sections. The first section of the tool is one of the input sections, and that is where you add cost. And it allows you to add both capital costs and operational costs. And then the tool also includes an element of adding in some organizational data. That's around salaries, number of people, and so on. This is so that we can monetize the benefits of the different design parameters. The third section is where you start to input start to unearth the tangible, less tangible benefits, where we start to look at those confidence levels that Anna mentioned, and what are the key design elements that we're changing in the new or refurbished workplace. And of course, the final section to all that is the output, and the output gives you a monetized benefit. So it converts all the productivity, performance data. It uses that to be able to predict the potential benefit to the occupants of the new or refurbished space. So let me just go through it stage by stage. It'll be a little bit easier to see. So I said the top part of the sheet is a simple cost input sheet. Many of you will be familiar with building business cases based on cost plans. We've chosen 5 years. That seems to be quite typical, in line with, say, some of the short-term leases and so on. And also a lot of business cases are based on 5 years, with some of the cost amortized over that 5-year period. So in terms of capital cost, you may enter several different elements. You can actually enter whatever you like into the capital costs in terms of how you normally break down your cost spreadsheet for capital projects. But we've actually included some default headings, which are based on the way that RICS do it in their latest guidance. But you can override that. But the idea is that you just basically put in your costs over a 5-year period. As you imagine, with capital costs, most of them are in the first year, but some may go through to second or third years. And then if, for example, you're building a business case around maybe a move to a new building, or you're negotiating some of the property costs with your landlord, you might want to include that in the business case as well. So this allows you to add operational costs over a 5-year period. And again, we've included some default operational costs, but you can break that down and enter the ones that how you may do it normally. So we enter those over the 5-year period. So you can see there how the cost is, which is our basic input variable, how the costs are building up over a 5-year period for both capital and operational costs. Then, as I said, the second stage is where we start to enter some of the organizational data, because ultimately we want to look at the percentage productivity benefits, performance benefits, and monetize them. And the standard way of doing that in the productivity research industry, if you like, is to look at salary costs. So basically, we can convert percentages into money by using an average or total salary cost as the basis of that calculation. So what this part of the spreadsheet does is it allows you to enter the number of staff and the mean salary, and that gives you the total salary for the group of people. You might just be looking at a department or a whole building or even a small team. It also allows you to put in the total salary, and then it will work out the mean salary for you and so on. Then the next thing it does is what we call this revenue to salary ratio. Now, the reason for that is in a lot of organizations, it's expected that the people who are employed will make more money for the organization than they're being paid. So, for example, in a consulting or management consulting industry, you might expect the revenue generated by a person to be 3 to 5 times their salary. So what this does, this line here, just lets you input that ratio. For not-for-profit organizations or public sector, it's probably 1 to 1. So that's the default value. And the final element of organizational variables is the cost of recruitment and training. So again, there's benchmarks out there, but many of you will know that the cost of costs money to advertise for new staff, to find those staff. You may even have to pay headhunter fees, bring those staff in, then you need to train them, and so on. And turnover of staff is a big issue for some companies, particularly some sectors. So you enter those organizational variables, which is the basis for how the monetized benefits are calculated. So then we come probably to the crux of the whole spreadsheet, which is this benefits input sheet. And this is where we start to say, okay, what are we going to do in our project, in either our refurbishment, or what are the things we're focusing on when we move to our new building? And we've basically allowed you to enter up to 5 key design parameters, design elements. And what the spreadsheet does is it allows you to go down each of those 9 elements that Anna already identified, and you rank them in order of your focus, I guess, how much effort you're putting in and where you want to see the most change. So you can see in this example that acoustics noise has been flagged up as an issue, so our project is mostly going to be focused on resolving that, and then we're going to look at space and layout and indoor air quality and so on. We don't go beyond 5 because our understanding is that you get a kind of diminishing returns in terms of the more effort and the more changes you make, that it's not simply additive. So I can't add the benefit of, say, fixing the lighting to the benefit of fixing the air quality to the benefit of fixing the temperature. It's not simply additive, it's a kind of law of diminishing returns. So we found that by the time you get to the 5th key component, it's getting towards 0 benefit. So it's better just to focus on the top 5. And also throughout the whole study and the methodology, we keep trying to be conservative. We don't want to hype the benefits because the FDs, financial directors, won't believe us. So a lot of the research and a lot of the tool is all about being very conservative in our estimations of benefit. Once we've worked out what our top 5 elements are, we then do this thing again that Hannah alluded to about where we say, have we got low, medium or high confidence in the return on that investment in terms of design and so on. And the default is low. We would recommend that you stick with low, and but you may have a little bit more faith, a little bit more confidence in how you're fixing things like acoustics. So you can see here we've left most of them as low or none, but acoustics we think, yeah, we're going to put a bit more effort into that, and we believe we'll get a better return on investment. So we've given it a slightly higher confidence level. And once you've done all that and you've filled in the other spreadsheets, the organizational data, the spreadsheet then automatically generates what it believes is the potential benefit of each of those design elements, which altogether forms task performance. So again, if you remember Hannah's bubble diagrams, much of the data is around the input on task performance. So those individual design elements contribute towards task performance, but they also contribute towards the other factors like reduced absenteeism, reduced staff attrition, increased organizational performance, and so on. And these are all calculated, again, being very conservative. There's no double counting. For example, if you have good individual performance, we then reduce the potential in team performance rather than double count individual and team, if that makes sense. That we treat them as separate and don't add them. So there's lots of background calculations going on, is I suppose what I'm saying, to come down to calculate the overall percentage benefit for us. And then, as I said, based on the organizational data, that is then automatically converted into a monetized value. So you can see the example here is if we do everything that we're budgeting for, we are going to get a 5% return, 5% benefit, I should say. And you can see the value there in terms of the potential monetized value of the benefit, which is another way of saying the potential cost saving if you're doing that kind of productivity equation of balancing cost in versus cost out and benefit out. And then the final section of the spreadsheet is where it actually calculates the return on workplace investment. And as I said, it basically subtracts the costs from the potential benefit, potential monetized benefit, and that will then work out the 1 year and the 5 year return on workplace investment. As I said, most projects are based on 5 years, but occasionally it might just be a small project that you're doing, a quick refurbishment. So you might just want to look at your 1 year return on workplace investment. So that's why the spreadsheet gives you both options. And that's what it looks like when it all comes together. This is a worked example. As I said, I don't expect you to look at details now, but basically all the information comes together and it creates a single spreadsheet for you where you can look at the costing and the potential benefits and return on investment. The tool actually allows for up to 5 of these different spreadsheets to be entered, and that's because you might want to look at different scenarios, different options. You might want to look at more investment in acoustics versus less investment in acoustics, or you might want to compare the benefits of moving to a new office versus the benefits of staying and doing a refurbishment. So it lets you use several spreadsheets to look at different scenarios, and it summarizes all of those into one spreadsheet for you, so you can then just see in one place what the pros and cons are, the benefits and costs are of the different scenarios. And obviously this is the summary sheet that you might be taking to your finance director or the head of department or head of organization and so on. And that is kind of it in a nutshell. It's quite complicated. I've gone through it fairly quickly. It needs training and assessment. I mean, we've spent a lot of time, nearly 2 years, developing this and working on it and fine-tuning it. We've done it with consultation with other people as well. And my advice is that if you really want to use the spreadsheet and use the tool, we need to kind of provide some training and advice on how to use it properly. And I think that's something that Peter's going to talk about next. But that is the spreadsheet. There's a detailed report that goes along with the nice glossy IWFM report that explains all of our reasoning behind this and how we came to the numbers and everything. Over to you, Peter.
Hello everyone, I've just tried and get my camera back on. That button seemed to freeze. No, I want to say massive thank you to Matt, Hannah and Nigel respectively as a team. They've gone through really 2 years worth of work, yes, in 33 minutes, if it was only that simple. But really today was to give you a flavour of what the Rowey tool is about. We're going to go next into the questions, which have we've got quite a lot of questions panelists. So I'm going to go through them straight to give back to our audience today in terms of some of their questions. Towards the end of the presentation, we're going to talk about some of the next steps. Nigel's already alluded to the report that's been launched today, which is a short synopsis that goes into detail on the back of today's webinar, so some information in there. As also, you can ask for a full request to an email address I'll share later, research@IWFM, in terms of the full report that we can send to you that gives you further detail. But as promised, and we started the webinar, encourage you to send your questions in, and you certainly have. So I want to bring all the panelists back in at this point for question time. And we've got a first question here, and Nigel, it might be best placed for you because it is based on basically the demonstration you've just gone through. And thank you for the question. It was around, why are you considering the salary and not the cost to company as that matrix? So where you started with salary, why did we choose that? So I think that's a great opening question, really.
Yeah, no, it is a good question, and I think salary is probably short term for full costs to an organisation. So we kept it loose, a loose term of salary, because that may be the only information some people have. But yeah, if you've got the national insurance contribution and pensions and all that stuff, then that might be the number that's added into the document. But I think salary is kind of, again, it's just a little bit more conservative and it's a bit more basic, and we're talking about converting salaries or the time, salary represents time, I would say, more than some of the other benefits. And ultimately what the tool is doing is it's using salary as a proxy for the effort and time that people are putting in. And it's the effort and time saved ultimately that is what a productivity benefit. Hopefully that makes sense. Matt, do you want to come in on that? I think I've got it right there, but
yeah, I mean, for me, the salary element is equally as flexible as the cost input in, with your operational costs and your capital costs, right? So we've used these terms that are probably going to be generic to all. But if you have the on costs available and you want to add those in, I don't see why you couldn't do that. You just have to make it clear, and maybe we could eventually have some sort of footnote in that this could include or may not include on costs, and maybe we could differentiate that in the future. Bear in mind, this is still the beta version. But just like the cost input in that you put in at the beginning, we mentioned that you'd want training for that. Unless you're really confident with all of the capital and operational costs, you're probably going to get consultation with that within your organization. And equally, you could get consultation within your organization for the salaries. You might liaise with HR, for example, to be able to input that information. You might liaise with the wider FM team or building team for the operational and capital costs. But really, these can be changed and adjusted depending on how you want it to look.
Thanks, Matt and Nigel. Now we have got a load of questions firing in. I'm just scrolling through in the audience. So if you see me looking at the watch, it's not because I'm bored, because I'm aware I want to just get through everything. So the body language can be misinterpreted. We've had some early feedback. Looks great. Great presentation, guys. Probably just leads there about training's been brought up a few times. I guess how to interpret the outputs too may need some hand holding. So I don't know, Nigel, Matt, Hannah, what's the plans around the training? Because I think a lot of people have seen this already based on this viewer, listener that wants to know more of how they could, what would be the training involved. So can we say anything at this stage with full details around how the training would work?
I think we can hint at it. I think we have to make it clear that with this demonstration today is the beta version, and the plan is to, over the next year or so, to develop it and fine tune it, and that certainly involves involvement from the members, and that involves involvement in terms of helping us get some of the fine tuning of the numbers and making sure that it's a user friendly device. But also it will involve us help to fine tune our training. So the ideal plan is that we will get several organisations who put themselves forward for us to help them use the tool and develop it. And with that, we will provide full-on hands-on training initially. Ultimately, that training will probably go online, and it'll be the classic video training. But I think initially it needs to be a little bit more hands-on as we kind of develop and establish the training that's needed. And obviously the supporting document that we've both mentioned, there's a lot in there about what each section does and how to fill in the numbers and what to be aware of and what not to do. But it's a tool. It's like any tool, isn't it? Like any spreadsheet tool, or even a calculator or slide rule there I mentioned. But if you enter the wrong numbers or you misuse it, you're going to get the wrong answers. Having said that, it's probably also about being consistent. So if you're comparing different scenarios, be consistent in how you enter the data for the different scenarios.
So I might bring you in, panelists, because we've got a scenario, and it's from a lady called Claire, and I do actually know Claire from one of our SIGs, that's asked about, it's a bit of a scenario. It reminds me of one of those questions, if the train leaves Liverpool at 10:32 and gets to car. Anyway, Claire, your question says great about the benefits you think you hope will get from the new workplace, including based on the cost inputted earlier. So I'm sure she's alluding to the live demo we've given today. So she's given a live example here about, so if I've designed an internal garden room in by cost design, I can get a 5 biophilia benefit. So I think she's used an example there about, I guess, those definitions you alluded to, Nigel, about how the tool would work. So on that live example, is there any more input you could give, Claire, on that and how the tool would work on that example, I guess?
So in terms of the actual intervention, which he was was it landscaping or in developing a biophilic?
An internal garden room.
Internal garden. Okay, so
Yeah.
there's an internal garden room. There'll be a biophilic benefit to that. Again, the biophilic studies we looked at were quite broad, so these are kind of quite broad brush numbers, which is why we always say use the most conservative numbers. But yes, there's no reason why she can't put in the cost data for that small project. It's going to be a small project, so she's probably not going to put in all the operational cost data, but maybe if there is any extra cost in terms of maintenance, lighting, hydroponics, I don't know, but she can enter all that into there. It sounds to me like it could be a fairly small scale project, so you'd probably want to be looking at the 1 year return on investment. And what it will do is it'll just help you capture, look, we've got the cost, we know how much this room's going to cost to install, but look, this is the potential benefit due to biophilia from restoring energy levels, from additional creativity. That's what all the research says, but it's very, very general. Hannah's nodding. I think she wants to come in on that one.
I was just nodding along to the amount of literature, specifically around restoration, creativity. Yeah, those definitely. I remember reading all those papers.
Yeah, so Hannah, that as you're on the mic there and keep it on, I'm going to bring in a couple of questions that have actually, I know today was about the demo, but also how we got to the tool and the background around the literature, was just about how you went through that and the exercise for you, because we've had comments about how amazing the amount of work that's been involved in the studies. So just from the reader perspective and from an academic point of view, if I can even say the word, what was the scenario there of detailing which was robust enough? I know you went through the different levels of confidence, but how you shifted or weeded out some of the material that wouldn't be seen as robust. So it'd be good just to, from the people involved, how that exercise was conducted, and also how you envisage it going forward, as obviously the workplace debate will continue, particularly in the post-COVID world. So 2 questions in one there, Hannah, but I'd love you bring you in on that in terms of how the literature review worked, and also how we future-proof the tool in future as more literature comes out.
Great, thanks for that question. Yeah, so first of all, a little bit on what Matt said, was talking about was the scoping review. So we went through a massive database of academic literature and also eventually industry reports. And what we did is we looked for literature that, well, first of all, looked at relationships between built environment and productivity benefits. But then we specifically focused on that data, that evidence that had those tangible metrics. So it wasn't just people said that they preferred, these environments, that they worked better. It had some kind of tangible metric. So for example, we found research that was in post offices, and the labour productivity was up by something like 0.9%, for example. So that data that had those tangible metrics. So we collected that, and then we identified, as Matt mentioned, those 194 metrics of that tangible data. And then we wanted to evaluate the credibility of each of that data as well, because as I said, some of the data came from experimental data, where there was research conducted in lab settings, some were in real world settings in offices, some were survey self-report studies. So we wanted some way of assessing the credibility of all those tangible metrics, and that's where we came up with this weighting system. And so this Rowey tool, it's specifically about office work environments. So we were looking at so real world, one of the subscales that we looked for the weightings was real world relevance, and that was specifically to the office environment. So for example, when we were looking at that post office data, how relevant was that to the real world within an office? So we wanted to go through each of these sources of data, and obviously something like a self-report study with a self-report questionnaire isn't going to be quite as objective as perhaps more of those business metrics. So we went through each individually each of the metrics. So we went back through each of the papers, looked at how the study was conducted, looked at where the study was conducted, and applied this weighting to each of those metrics. So we tried to be quite systematic in our approach to each, to collecting the evidence to begin with that scoping review, which is a really, if anybody's heard of kind of a systematic review, the scoping review just allows for the inclusion of industry reports, which have a massive amount of really good evidence as well. And we didn't want to just stick to that academic data. And then we wanted to keep that rigor in the way that we then used and translated all that data into the tool. I've rambled on a little bit there, but
no, thank you, Hannah. Again, I think it was important because we've had a couple of questions around the literature, and as I said very flippantly, but wasn't joking aside, the amount of work that was involved in this 2-year project to get us to where today. So it's exciting stuff, and I know yourself and Matt were pivotal to it. So today was just giving people a flavour of that hard work. But I think in what you've just explained there is the difficulty of the question about how this could be proven, and going through those examples of literature. I imagine some varied in the politest sense as well in terms of their robustness. So I'm going to go back to questions. Thank you for that, Hannah. And they're still coming in. So I want to thank you, the audience, so still stick with us. So we'll get to them. In terms of our next question, probably just links there, Hannah, and this is to the whole panel, so I don't know what comes into that. You mentioned that it's predominantly aimed the tool at the office environment. We've had a question here from Paul about, would the tool actually work on the refurbishment of NHS wards, for example? So a setting outside the office environment. I don't know who's more than happy to answer that. Is that a yes, no, maybe? Not that it's a closed question, but anyone got any views on that?
Well, I'll start. Because the majority of the literature that we looked at, not all of it, but the majority of it was more related to office type tasks. There was some manufacturing in there, and there were some other environments as well. But all the weighting, as Anna's just explained, was about how it would benefit the office, a real world office. So everything was converted back to the office. So I might be talking out of turn here, but my view is it's very much for the office world at the moment. NHS trust offices, yes, but not NHS wards and consultation rooms and so on. That's a wonderful aspiration for maybe further down the line to have tools, just like for different sectors and different environments, just like I'm thinking like Bream and so on, and Briam and Lead and so on, where they started with offices and now they do homes and schools and things like that. But yeah, I think just trying to crack the office one is a challenge enough.
Yeah. I guess that follows on another question, and again to all panelists, is probably going back to basics. Who really is the target audience for the usage of this tool? I know with the vast experience we've got on the webinar with yourself, Nigel, Matt and Hannah, respectively, about who's envisaged to use this tool, what sectors is this aimed at? And it links to a question I've got here from Stephen, who's sent 2 in. So Stephen, I am answering one of your questions and proposing it, is how do you convince the CFO of the benefit of findings? Is that the holy grail of the individual that we're really trying to convince here about the cost versus value debate? So sorry, panelists, I'm being a difficult host today. I'm sort of wrapping 2 or 3 questions into one because of the amount of questions. So really who the target audience is, and also how do you convince the CFO on that? So really, I guess it goes back to the real purpose of the tool. So I don't know who wants to come in on that.
I can come in if you want. I thank you, Stephen. I love this question. This was my favorite one because this is the whole purpose of the tool in the first place, that what we wanted to do is create something, and a lot of people will have a problem with it because it's crude. It takes a lot of intangible, complex scenarios, and it monetizes them, and not everyone's going to like that. But the primary reason for doing that is to try and talk a language to business, to leaders in an organization, in a language that they will understand, and to try and convince them that changes to a workplace environment will have a significant benefit to the organization. How we convince them in terms of validity specifically will hopefully, from what you've seen today, from the way in which the tool has been developed, that it is based on such a wealth of credible academic literature. There is a specific methodology for how this tool was developed. It's not perfect. It's the first version of it, which we hope will be developed over time. Like any app that you might have on your phone has updates over time. But I often refer to this Rowey tool as it's kind of the Google Translate for the workplace. We're trying to translate language that we're all used to as a workplace and FM community into a language that CFOs, COOs, CEOs, they're going to understand, they're going to be able to relate to, and hopefully see the impact that these things can potentially have to their organization.
No, thank you, Matt. Hannah and Nigel, respectively, anything to add on what Matt said there in terms of really where we started out on this journey and where we hope to get to? So anything else to add?
Yeah, I think that it's great that we're launching the tool today, because I think with people returning to the workplace post-pandemic, it's got even more value. One of my biggest concerns is that there's always been pressure on the facilities management community to reduce cost, and that's how they almost show their worth, is by cost reduction. Whereas actually what the building is about at the end of the day is maximising the benefit to the employees in terms of performance and well-being. So for me, I think this is a tool that helps the facilities management industry take the higher ground and actually have those conversations at a much higher level about how you can improve business rather than just how you can save money all the time. And as I say, I think it's more relevant now in post-pandemic world, because certainly what you hear out there is that people are talking about halving their space and reducing space, and people aren't going to be in the office. So this is whilst on the one hand, this is about give me some money, additional money to help me invest to make things better. It's also a tool to say, let's not take away the money because things might get worse. So the tool works both ways. It's a justification for maintaining and improving spending rather than and to help with that over focus on cost reduction. And as Matt said, but what you're doing is you're building a proper business case that doesn't just include cost benefits, but it also includes the less tangible benefits like performance and well-being. And you can take that to the finance director to put forward a much more robust business case. And several years ago, I actually did that with an early version. Matt alluded to some of the research I did many years ago. And as part of the research then, we actually used it to justify some additional expenditure at an organisation. And we convinced the FD, and he absolutely believed our data and took it on board. And he said, OK, here's the extra money. I get what you're doing now.
No, and that's probably vital to what we want to get to. We've talking about time. We've got room for a couple more questions. And I alluded to post-COVID world, you mentioned time, return to office. We've got a couple of questions in from Amra and Chris that are around the same theme. How does the model stroke to allow for different usage patterns as allowing for the variances in how people use the workplace over time? So I haven't used the word yet, but I guess it's how does the tool take in consideration hybrid work models? So I don't know who wants to come in there, as we're in that hybrid working stage at the moment.
I'll come in unless others want to, but I mean the tool's very generic. So the way that the cost input sheet set up and is that you can add in the additional costs for introducing hybrid working, but you can also don't forget you can also incorporate any savings that you'll see elsewhere. But fundamentally, the tool is more directed at the how we justify additional investment rather than how we take things away. But it's just a cost benefit analysis sheet with this extra bit with non-tangible benefits. So whenever you're building a business case, you would be used to doing cost benefit analysis. That's fundamentally what it is. It's just got another extra complicated layer around the benefits. So I don't see any reason why it can't be used for hybrid working models, full remote working models, whatever. It may take a little bit more creativity in how you use set up the spreadsheet, but it's quite generic and adaptable to allow you to look at those different settings and different scenarios, sorry. And again, I think the beauty of having several spreadsheets is you can look at the different scenarios and compare the costs versus the benefits of each of those scenarios. Traditional working, agile working, hybrid working, remote working, whatever you want to call it, you can start comparing them all.
And this might be a question that might sound a little bit obvious. There's a couple of themes coming through the audience. We've entitled this webinar, The Return on Workplace Investment, Can It Be Proven? Why has it taken so long for something to be established in this way? So I guess with the vast experience that people have got to know from the introductions, and many of the audience may have come across your work, Nigel, Matt and Hannah, but why now? Why has something taken now for this to work? I don't know if there's a long checkered history on this, Nigel, Matt and Hannah, but I think it might be an important question if we can possibly answer it.
People have had different attempts at it. I mean, let's not forget the Stoddart report as well. I mean, that was pretty much about the same subject. But what our focus has been on is a practical tool, because whilst there's been lots of talk out there and research about the potential benefits, I don't think anyone's kind of boiled it down into something that's pragmatic. The other thing is the research is sometimes complicated. It's sometimes contradictory. It's just a lot out there, and it might be that there's. I know people say there's not enough evidence, but actually, on the other hand, you could argue there's so much evidence out there, and there's too much that it's overburdening. But for me, it came down to the weightings that Hannah took us through, because if you just take the face value of a lot of the research, you get massive variation. So if you look at the research for something, example like noise, acoustics, you get a 0.1% benefit all the way through to 160, 200% benefit. And if you put that in front of an FD, they just think you're mad. It's like, sorry, is that the tolerance levels we're talking around here? It doesn't make any sense financially or scientifically. So by doing the weightings, what we're actually done is we've boiled it down to something that's a little bit more practical and conservative and all the rest of it. And I think that's been the biggest issue, is that whilst there's been research out there, it's just been so contradictory that people haven't known what to do with it.
Right, we've had a lot of questions in, and at this point I want to let the audience know, thank you for those, and I'll be talking about how we can continue the debate on a social media platform. But just to wrap up, panel, this is the final one. We've had a lot of early feedback in the questions in terms of feedback as a gift, as I call it, in terms of excellent work, great work. How do we get hold of this? How can we use it? So we've alluded to beta testing. So I guess the obvious question is where do we go? Where are we going next with this? So I know I'll be touching that on some of my closing slides, but it'd be good from the panel's perspective, just to articulate to the audience viewers what the next steps are.
I mean, shall I come in with this, guys?
Yeah, go on, Matt. Great.
You know, what's exciting is that we are committed to a second phase with yourselves, Peter, to look at how we actually can do some in-depth testing with this. So before we start entering into discussions with how we train people to use it, there's still a lot of work to actually pilot it, put in some real life settings, and also Hannah and I are keen to gather further research on how this will actually assist in decision-making processes. So we're going to be gathering that in the kind of phase 2 exercise. If you consider everything that you've seen today as phase 1, that will be phase 2. Based on the outputs of that, I think what we're hoping is we can aim to provide a more slick version of the tool, which is perhaps that ultimate goal of maybe having some sort of online platform for it. And then we'll be looking at a rollout of you know, training, however that will be required, and then it will be available to everybody.
No, thank you, Matt, and that is the intention. So there is some call to action slides I've got here just alluding to the next steps, but at this point I'm going to close the webinar for the panelists. I just want to say a massive thank you to Nigel, Matt and Hannah. They are lovely people to work with. The added bonus is they're highly intelligent, which is great. And today was really to demonstrate to the audience, viewers, a 2-year project to get here. We're really excited about the tool. The report's out there to view and download. And yeah, the next stage is where this tool brings us to actually have something tangible to quantify the return on workplace and build on the Stoddard review that Nigel alluded to earlier. So Matt, Hannah and Nigel, thank you once again. Audience, this has been recorded. So again, please cascade to clients, colleagues that didn't make today's webinar. So as promised, I've just got a couple of closing slides just to finish proceedings. So if we can move on. As mentioned, and it's gone into the chat for the live viewers, but for us, for viewers, listeners coming back on the recording, if you're interested in getting involved in the pilot or the beta testing that's alluded to, please email research@iwfm.org.uk. At this stage, we're taking the level of interest. More detail will be out about the pilot in terms of how that would work, but today should give you enough flavour of what the tool can offer. And if you respectively as an individual when your organisation would like to get involved, please email us there. So if we just move on. Thank you. As promised, we want to continue the debate. So literally at 1 o'clock, we've launched the Rowey conversation on LinkedIn. Please join us there using those hashtags. So viewers that joined us live, please go on there now if you can. There's a couple of the team that will be joining just to monitor. If you've got any further questions, statements, comments, please put your views on there. And that's a continuing conversation. That's not just something today. That's something we want to build as a long tail, but behind today's webinar. So please get engaged on social media as well. So just moving on. As alluded to, we mentioned to the report that can be found on the insight pages of the IWFM. Also, you see dedicated content hubs, research reports such as the Stoddard review that's now almost at its 5 years. I don't know where time's gone, but still has a shelf life in terms of what the content is there. That's available on the website. Good practice guides and guidance notes. Alongside this webinar, as I said, this is the 61st episode of our NTT series, so this will be uploaded shortly onto our website and our YouTube channel, so please look out for it there. So once again, I want to say a massive thank you to Matt, Nigel and Hannah for their work, their input today and the continued activity on this important, vital project for our profession, which will continue throughout 2022. I want to remind the viewers, listeners, we do have a survey, post survey. It's very short. It's not just rating today's episode, but also what you would like to see out of our future NTT episodes. We've acted listen, so we've built our program upon that feedback. So please give us feedback. It's very much appreciated. And obviously your time today joining us for an hour. So hopefully you've engaged, learned a lot about what the Rowey tool is about and how it could help you as an individual as well as your organisation. Next week's episode, I can say it's already on our website in terms of it. That's tackling the diversity and inclusion debate along with our head of policy, Sophie Hooper. So that webinar is available to register to. We've just recently launched our public statement on our EDI policy. So please look out for that. So that webinar is happening next week. So I think that's it, folks. I just want to say a massive thank you once again for joining us on our 61st episode and take care. Thank you.